Beneath the endless sea of stars, where thrones turn to dust and memories lose their worth, two lost souls crossed paths, a dethroned queen and a madman who could no longer recall his own name. The canopy above shimmered with constellations unknown to any charted galaxy. Trees of crystalline branches reached toward the heavens, their leaves glowing faintly like whispers of forgotten light. Between those ethereal giants, a man stirred. His breath was shallow, his body draped in tattered remnants of cloth and armor whose origins he could not name. The cool wind carried scents both sweet and alien, but none stirred recognition within his hollow mind. He opened his eyes gray, like storm clouds over a distant ocean, and gazed at a sky that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. He did not know how long he had wandered these luminous forests. Time had dissolved into a cycle of hunger, survival, and the haunting silence of a mind stripped bare. Yet, his hands knew how to fashion tools from shards of fallen crystal. His feet knew where the ground would betray him. Instinct guided him where memory could not. Tonight, however, the wind carried something different, the scent of blood and the faintest echo of desperation. Drawn by forces he could not name, he moved like a shadow between the glowing trunks, his bare feet silent against the moss that pulsed with bioluminescent life. As he crested a rise, his stormy gaze fell upon a figure collapsed at the base of a radiant tree. She was unlike any creature this forest had offered. Draped in torn silken robes that shimmered with a dying light of nobility, her form was delicate yet unyielding. Silver hair, matted with streaks of violet blood, cascaded over her shoulders. Her elongated ears, a regal signature of a lineage long revered among the stars, twitched faintly, defiance even in ruin. For a moment, he simply watched her, head tilted like a beast studying a fallen star. There was no recognition in his gaze, no understanding of crowns or kingdoms. Only the silent pull of something familiar. Her eyes snapped open, twin amethysts burning with pride and warning. Though weakened, her gaze could still cut sharper than any blade. When she saw him, wild-haired, draped in rags and shadows, eyes empty yet deep, a flicker of disdain crossed her face. "Stay back," her voice, though hoarse, carried the command of one born to rule. He did not answer. Words had long since abandoned him. Instead, he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if approaching a wounded animal that might yet bare its fangs. Lisara's hand trembled as she reached for the hilt of a ceremonial dagger at her side, more symbol than weapon now, its edge dulled by betrayal rather than time. He stopped a few paces away, watching her with a gaze that seemed to peer through the layers of silk, blood, and pride. Then, without ceremony, he knelt and placed a rough, calloused hand on the ground, palm open, fingers extended toward her. An offering. Or perhaps, a question. Lisara's breath hitched. No words. No demands. Just that silent gesture beneath the indifferent stars. She wanted to scoff, to turn away from this creature of dirt and madness. But as the wind whispered through the crystalline leaves, carrying with it the distant howl of hunters, those who had chased her from her throne, she realized the bitter truth. There was no entourage to shield her. No palace walls to command. Only the cold expanse of an uncaring universe, and a madman with an outstretched hand. Pride warred with survival. For a heartbeat longer, she held his gaze, a queen measuring the worth of a ghost. Finally, with a movement as graceful as it was reluctant, she placed her slender, blood-streaked hand into his. His fingers closed around hers, firm, but without dominance. In that moment, no vows were spoken. No titles exchanged. Only two fates, bound not by choice, but by the cruel poetry of circumstance. Under the watchful eyes of 1,000 nameless stars, she rose with his support, her posture still regal despite the ruin. He gave a single, silent nod, not of servitude, but of acknowledgement. As if some fragment of the man he once was stirred beneath the layers of forgotten time. Lisara lifted her chin, her gaze still sharp, still unbroken. Yet within the depths of her amethyst eyes, a reluctant acceptance glimmered. Thus, beneath a sky indifferent to crowns and memories, a dethroned queen and a nameless madman took their first step into a legend. The stars bore witness, as they always had. And so began the melody of fate. The void stretched endlessly before them, a sea of drifting starlight and forgotten relics of empires long turned to dust. In this vast silence, where even time dared not speak, Lisara walked, her steps light but her heart heavy with wounds both visible and unseen. Behind her, as constant as the stars above, was the madman. She had not chosen him. No queen would ever choose a guardian so wild, so crude. Yet fate had left her no courtiers, no knights clad in shining armor. Only this nameless wanderer, whose silence spoke louder than words, and whose eyes though hollow never wavered from her path. They moved through the skeletal remains of a celestial palace, a ruin from a civilization whose name had been swallowed by the void. Crystalline arches floated weightlessly, tethered by invisible threads of ancient energy. Shards of forgotten glory glimmered like frozen tears in the endless night. Lisara's breath misted in the cold air of space-bound ruins. Her once pristine robes, now tattered banners of survival, trailed behind her like fading memories of a throne that no longer existed. A sound, a low hum, predatory and sharp, cut through the stillness. Her ears twitched, the instinct of royalty sharpened by days of pursuit. Without turning, she knew, the bounty hunters had found their trail again. Mercenaries with no loyalty but to coin, chasing the price placed upon her head by the usurper. Before her hand could reach for the dull ceremonial blade at her waist, he was already moving. The madman, her shadow, her unlikely shield, stepped ahead, his ragged cloak billowing like the wings of some ancient beast. His storm-gray eyes narrowed, not with fear, but with the calm precision of one who had danced with death far too many times. From his side, he drew the plasma blade, a relic dulled by time but deadly in hands that remembered what the mind had forgotten. Lisara watched, torn between disdain and a grudging sense of awe, as he vanished into the darkness beyond a shattered archway. Moments later, the silence was broken by flashes of light, brief, violent stars born of combat. The hum of weapons clashed with the feral rhythm of survival. When he returned, his blade was stained with a faint glow of alien blood, and his chest rose and fell with the steady breath of a man for whom killing was as natural as breathing. He said nothing. He never did. Lisara found herself studying him longer than she intended. Each movement was raw yet precise, a contradiction of savagery wrapped in the discipline of a forgotten warrior. He should have been nothing more than a beast. Yet there was grace in his brutality, a haunting familiarity in the way he shielded her without question, without expectation. They pressed on, deeper into the graveyard of stars, where derelict ships and fragments of dead worlds floated like ghosts. Hours passed, or perhaps days. The void had no mercy for those who sought to measure its passage. Finally, They reached a place where even echoes dared not follow a hollowed core of a fallen star, its light extinguished eons ago. The remnants of its heart pulsed faintly, a dying ember in the cradle of darkness. Here, they rested. Lisara sat upon a fragment of celestial stone, her body weary but her posture unyielding. The madman crouched nearby, sharpening his blade against a shard of crystalline debris, though it hardly needed it. For a long while, neither spoke. Words felt too heavy, too fragile for a place where gods had once whispered. But as Lisara gazed into the endless abyss beyond the broken star, something within her stirred a crack in the armor of pride she had worn since birth. Her voice, when it came, was soft, not the commanding tone of a queen, but the quiet confession of a soul stripped bare by fate. "If you can lead me to see another dawn," she began, her eyes never leaving the void, "I will grant you anything within my power." The words floated between them, weightless yet eternal. A promise made not before courtiers or beneath gilded ceilings, but beneath the watchful eyes of forgotten stars. She turned to him then, expecting, she didn't know what. A nod, perhaps. A grunt of acknowledgement. But he simply looked at her, those storm-gray eyes reflecting the dying light of the star's core. There was no hunger in his gaze, no calculation. Only a quiet warmth that defied the emptiness around them. It was as if he had already accepted the oath, not for reward, but because some echo within him compelled it. Lisara felt a strange tightness in her chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. Trust, a dangerous thing for a queen without a throne. Yet, in that silence, she realized the truth. She had already placed her life in his hands long before her lips had spoken. Between them, no blood pact was needed. No sacred rites. Just a glance. Just the quiet understanding that, in this boundless void, where thrones were meaningless and names forgotten, two souls had forged a bond that neither time nor destiny could sever. As she lowered her gaze, a whisper escaped her lips, a thought not meant for ears, but for the void itself. "May the stars remember this promise, even if we do not." The madman rose, slinging the blade over his back. Without a word, he offered his hand once more. Lisara hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. Together, they stepped forward into the darkness, into uncertainty, bound by a vow that needed no witnesses. The void watched. And somewhere, in the distant shimmer of dying light, the universe etched their oath into the fabric of eternity. Between a dethroned queen and a madman without a past, a legend began to take shape, not with fanfare, but with a silent promise beneath the broken star. The ruins of the once mighty palace loomed before them, bathed in the cold glow of a fractured sky. Where once banners of royal lineage fluttered proudly, now only tattered remnants danced in the wind, a kingdom's glory reduced to whispers of dust. Lisara stood at the threshold, her amethyst eyes fixed upon the broken gates of her past. Behind her, as always, was the madman, silent, steadfast, his storm-gray gaze scanning the shadows where danger lurked. There would be no more running. "We end this tonight," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Yet, as if understanding the weight of her resolve, he stepped forward, drawing his plasma blade with a sound that resonated like a dirge. They crossed into the heart of betrayal. The grand hall, once a testament to celestial artistry, was now a battlefield waiting to be stained anew. Crystalline pillars shattered, mosaics depicting ancient victories cracked beneath the boots of traitors. At the far end, seated arrogantly upon the fractured throne, was the usurper Voroth, clad in armor that gleamed with stolen authority. Around him, a sea of soldiers, their weapons drawn, their eyes hungry for the price on Lisara's head. "Lisara," Voroth sneered, rising slowly. "I see you've brought a pet. Fitting, for a queen without a crown." Lisara's spine remained straight, her voice a blade sharper than any steel. "Tonight, this hall remembers who it was built for." The first arrow flew, a signal that words had no place here. The madman moved before thought could catch him, his blade a blur of light and death. He cut down the projectile mid-flight, then launched himself into the fray with the grace of a phantom and the fury of a storm long held at bay. Lisara followed, her ceremonial dagger flashing a symbol-turned weapon. Each step she took was a reclaiming of ground stolen from her birthright. The battle became a symphony of chaos. Sparks flew like dying stars as metal clashed against forgotten skill. The madman wove through waves of enemies, every strike precise, every movement echoing a past he no longer recalled but his body never forgot. Lisara fought by his side, but her gaze was drawn again and again to the way he shielded her without hesitation, placing himself between her and every blade that sought her life. Blood alien and familiar painted the shattered tiles beneath her feet. As the tide of soldiers began to thin, Voroth descended from the throne, drawing a blade black as the void itself. His eyes locked onto Lisara with the malice of a man who believed destiny could be stolen. "You should have stayed in exile," he hissed, lunging toward her. The clash was brutal. Lisara parried, but Voroth's strength was fueled by corruption and fear. His blade sought her heart not just to kill, but to erase. In that fatal moment, when steel screamed toward her chest, a shadow intervened. The madman. His body collided with hers, forcing her aside as Voroth's blade sank deep into his side. A sickening sound echoed through the hollowed hall. Time fractured. Lisara stumbled, catching herself on a broken pillar. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw him kneeling, blood darkening his tattered cloak, yet still gripping Voroth's weapon to prevent its retreat. Voroth snarled, yanking his blade free, but the madman did not fall. He turned, staggering toward Lisara, his breath ragged but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were calm. Not with resignation, but with something far deeper. He reached her, collapsing to one knee, and with a hand stained in his own blood, he took hers. Their fingers intertwined, rough calluses against royal grace. Lisara's heart pounded, not with a thrill of victory, but with a terror she had never known. The throne could be reclaimed. The traitor could be slain. But this was a loss she could not bear. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking as she knelt beside him. "Why would you?" He said nothing. He never did. But his gaze spoke volumes. It wasn't for crowns or causes. It wasn't for oaths spoken beneath dead stars. It was for her. For the single moment when her eyes had seen him not as a beast, not as a weapon but as a man. Around them, the last of Voroth's soldiers hesitated, unsure whether to advance or flee the ghost who refused to die. Lisara rose, her hand still clutching his. With a voice that echoed through the ruined hall, she declared, "This throne is not built on fear. It is reclaimed by blood freely given." Voroth charged again, But Lisara met him with a fury born not of royalty, but of a heart awakened. The battle ended with Varatha's blade shattered and his rein broken. But as the dust settled and silence reclaimed the hall, Lisara's gaze returned to the madman. He lay still, his breathing shallow, his hand limp in hers. The throne upon which she once sat in pride now loomed above its base stained with his blood. Tears she did not know she could shed traced down her cheeks. "The throne can be taken back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But a heart like yours exists only once in a galaxy?" As his eyes fluttered closed, Lisara pressed his hand to her chest, where her heart raced not for power, but for the man who had reminded her what it truly meant to be alive. Above them, the fractured ceiling revealed the endless stars, silent witnesses to a queen who realized too late that some victories cost more than any crown could repay. The throne was hers again. Lisara stood beneath the towering spires of the restored palace, the weight of the crown pressing colder than she remembered. The murmurs of courtiers and advisors echoed through the grand hall, voices filled with schemes, alliances, and expectations. They spoke of stability, of duty, of a marriage that would bind empires and secure her reign. But her heart was not among them. Beyond the marble columns and silken banners, in a quiet chamber far removed from the politics of power, the madman stirred. He had survived. Yet when his storm-gray eyes opened, they reflected no past, only the same quiet void that had always been there. His body healed, but his memories remained a blank canvas, untouched by the glories and tragedies that had shaped him. He rose from the simple bed, draped in plain garments foreign to the grandeur around him. No guards stopped him as he walked the palace corridors. To them, he was a relic of the queen's strange mercy, a ghost allowed to wander. Lisara watched from the shadows as he moved through halls that once echoed with her ancestors' footsteps. Her advisor's words still rang in her ears. "The alliance with Prince Kalar is imperative, Your Majesty. A royal wedding will silence dissent and solidify your rule. A crown, a throne, a future carved in gold and obligation." And yet, she saw him pause before a window overlooking the endless stars, his expression unreadable. He did not belong to this world of velvet and chains. He never had. The day of the coronation arrived, grander than any celebration the court had seen since the fall. The hall blazed with light, jeweled gowns, and polished armor reflecting the brilliance of reclaimed power. Lisara stood at the center, adorned in ceremonial robes of white and silver, the crown resting upon her brow like a shackle masquerading as glory. Beside her, Prince Kalar, a vision of royal perfection, awaited the binding vows. Her gaze, however, searched beyond the sea of faces. And there he was. At the far end of the hall, unnoticed by nobles too consumed with spectacle, the madman stood. Dressed in humble attire, his dark hair tousled, his storm-gray eyes calm as ever. He did not plead. He did not linger. He turned to leave, his figure moving toward the grand doors, like a gust of wind slipping through the cracks of a suffocating chamber. Lisara's fingers tightened around the cold metal of the scepter. The priest's voice faded into nothingness. The weight of centuries bore down upon her shoulders, but it was not enough to anchor her heart. In a single, fluid motion, she reached up and removed the crown. Gasps rippled through the hall as the symbol of power slipped from her fingers, landing upon the marble floor with a sound far louder than its weight should allow. She stepped down from the dais, each footfall echoing like a drum beat of defiance. Prince Kaler called after her, confusion and outrage lacing his voice, but Lisara did not falter. Through rows of stunned courtiers, she walked, her silver-purple hair flowing like a banner of rebellion. The madman had reached the threshold when she caught up to him. Without hesitation, she reached out, her slender hand closing around his. He turned slightly, storm-gray eyes meeting her amethyst gaze. There was no need for words. Between them, understanding flowed like a silent river. Behind them, the hall erupted into chaos, advisors shouting, alliances crumbling before they could be sealed. But Lisara heard none of it. "This throne," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm around them, "was never meant to hold me prisoner." He said nothing, but his fingers tightened around hers, an anchor not of duty, but of choice. Together, they crossed the threshold, leaving behind a kingdom that had tried to bind them with tradition and expectation. The stars awaited a horizon unclaimed by crowns or courts. As they stepped into the light of a new dawn, Lisara felt the weight she had carried for so long lift from her soul. Between a queen and a madman, no vows were spoken. But amidst the collapse of empires and the fading echoes of royal decrees, a greater truth remained. In a galaxy obsessed with power, she chose freedom. And in a hall of 1,000 witnesses, she reached not for a throne but for the warmest hand she'd ever known. The stars stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of light and shadow untouched by empires, crowns, or forgotten wars. A small ship, humble in design, free of royal insignias or markings of allegiance, glided silently through the vast expanse. Within it, two souls sat side by side, no longer bound by titles or memories that once defined them. Lisara gazed out through the panoramic window, her amethyst eyes reflecting the swirling colors of the uncharted nebula ahead. The silver-purple strands of her hair drifted gently in the low gravity, no longer adorned with jewels or the weight of expectation. Beside her, the man who had once been called Mad leaned back in his seat, his storm-gray eyes calm, watching the same stars but seeing something far simpler: freedom. They had left it all behind. The throne, the court, the whispers of politics and power plays. The crown now rested in a forgotten chamber, gathering dust as the galaxy argued over succession and alliances. None of it mattered anymore. "Do you regret it?" Lisara's voice was soft, a melody carried by the hum of the ship's engine. He turned to her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. There was no need for words. His hand reached out, fingers brushing against hers with a familiarity that transcended language. Regret had no place among the stars. They had chosen this path not as a queen and a nameless warrior, but as two beings who had found something far rarer than power: each other. Ahead, the nebula shimmered like a dream, an endless sea of cosmic mist, painted in hues of violet, gold, and deep cerulean. No charted maps marked this region. It was a place where stories had yet to be written. Lisara closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet serenity that filled the cabin. For the first time in her life, every breath felt her own. "What shall we call it?" she asked, nodding toward the nebula. He glanced at the swirling expanse, then back at her. His smile deepened, not with the burden of naming territories or claiming discoveries, but with the simplicity of sharing a moment. "Ours?" he finally said, his voice low and steady. A soft laugh escaped her lips, light and genuine. It was not the laugh of a ruler, but of a woman who had found peace. Time became irrelevant as the ship drifted deeper into the uncharted beauty. There were no destinations, no missions, only the journey itself. In the evenings, they would sit beneath the artificial starlight within the ship, sharing silence more intimate than any conversation. Sometimes Lisara would hum ancient melodies from a world she no longer claimed, and he would close his eyes, letting the sound weave through the quiet like a thread connecting past to present. Their bond required no grand declarations. It was etched in every glance, every touch, every shared breath beneath the indifferent gaze of the cosmos. Legends say that somewhere beyond the edges of known space, a ship still sails through the eternal night. A woman with hair like starlight and eyes that held the wisdom of lost kingdoms. A man whose past was a void, but whose future was written in the constellations he wandered with her. They were not seeking new worlds to conquer, nor civilizations to impress. They were chasing freedom, the purest kind. And so, the tale spread across galaxies, passed in hushed tones within spaceports and among travelers who dared to dream beyond the rigid lines of star charts. She was a queen, they would say, who cast aside her crown for a man without a name. And he, others would add, needed no memories, for he had found something greater than history. He found her. No one remembered what they were called. Their names faded, as all names do. But the story endured. A story of a queen who chose love over power. Of a madman who became whole without needing to remember who he had been. Together, they became more than titles, more than the sum of their pasts. They became a whisper among the stars, a reminder that some legacies are not built on thrones or carved into monuments, but carried in the hearts of those who dare to live freely. As their ship vanished into the shimmering embrace of the nebula, the galaxy moved on, as it always does. Yet somewhere, in the quiet moments when travelers look up at the endless sky, they wonder about the two souls who left everything behind. No one remembers their names. But everyone remembers that, amidst the infinite expanse of stars, there exists a love story that never faded, a legend etched across the galaxy.